Hoojies Garage here. This is going to be an episode around the 1960s, and I'm in the Saab museum, and I will show you around a bit. Now, the 1960s started with the Saab 96. In many ways, it is not that much of a new development, because most of the development for this car was made in the 1950s for the Saab 95. That was the estate of the Saab 93. Anyhow, so this car then, the Saab 96, has the same powertrain as the 95, 841cc and so on. 4-speed gearbox was standard on the Gran Turismo and the sports car, or the sports model. Yeah, this is a replica of the rally-winning car that Eric Carlson drove in the early 1960s. So the sports model had disc brakes also. Looking around here, well, the front one knows the doors were the same as the 93F front hinge doors. There was, however, quite a bit of change at the rear end. The rear window was much enlarged. The having good vision was, of course, always appreciated. As it, well, it was appreciated then, and it's still appreciated, even though some designs make the design a bit weird. One other important thing was climate enhancement or climate improvement. There was no proper air evacuation from the Saab 93 and the 92. So here it was solved in a rather crude way, one could think. They opened up a hole here and then put the cover over it. The designer Sixten Sassen that worked together with Gunnar Ljungström wasn't all that fond of this solution, but well, he had to accept that that was the most practical way of improving the climate control or airflow through the system or through the car. So in a way, it's mostly the rear end that is new. The rear seat also got improvements. So let's say like this, the whole body was slightly wider from the doors and rearwards. So they thought, well, by the standards of that time, that the rear seat was fairly roomy. Well, try to get in 3 persons in the rear seat of the Saab 96 and you will not find it that roomy. But, well, in those days it was felt to be sufficient, and it was registered as a 5-seater. The real headache for Saab in the 1960s, or let's say like this, at least in the beginning of the 1960s, and it got worse. So it was identified as an issue already in the early 1960s. That was the powertrain. Just as good as it was to make a little light and cheap engine in the early 1950s when you were starting off a new business, then as problematic it started to get by the, well, some years into the 1960s. So the engineering department got into testing a lot of different engines, because building a new 4-stroke engine from scratch within the budgets that Saab had available, that was kind of out of the question. I mean, the sales volumes of Saabs in those days weren't all that high, and well, it never were, but in those days it was, you know, kind of 20,000 cars per year, maybe 30,000. It was not that much. So they bought engines from, let me think now. They bought engines from Lancia, Ford, Morris, Lloyd even, and I think also they tried a Volvo engine. And they made different test cars with these engines put in place here, and they managed to squeeze all those engines in here. And the conclusion, as far as I understand, was that it was the Ford V4 engine that originally was designed in Detroit or in Dearborn maybe. But it was never really used in the US as far as I know, but it was transferred to Cologne, where Ford had its, or still have its European headquarters. And there it was developed for Taunus model and several other Fords that needed such an engine. Now, that development of getting a new engine or a 4-stroke engine into the Saab 96 was put at halt, and the engineers got kind of stuck. So they understood that they first also had to get more room into the engine area. So let's take a look here and see if we can find a long nose car from that era, the middle of the 1960s. Well, by the way, if you wonder what this is, that's extra ventilation from the engine compartment. You know, the radiator sits here, and getting air that way wasn't sufficient when you had a highly tuned engine. This engine was like 80 horsepower or something, so it developed more heat, and this was a way to get more heat out of the engine bay area. So the engine problem was a hot topic to try to solve during the mid-1960s, let's say like that. So I looked around in the museum and I could not find a long-nosed two-stroke car. This is as close as you get, so to speak, but this is a prototype car for the Saab 99. But the appearance is at least similar. Now it might look a bit weird since it has no bonnet, but it had that type of grille, and the extension of the nose is, let's say, representative. I think the fenders are the correct ones at least. So they had a real problem. The manager of the car division, you know, Saab made airplanes and cars, but the manager of the car division, he just thought that no, we have to produce two-stroke cars for another 5 years or something. And I think that was said like 1964 or 65 something. And Gunnar Ljungström did not want to oppose the manager, but Rolf Melde was a bit of a funny guy, or a wild guy, let's say like that. And he was also, at that point in time, I think he was in charge of powertrain development. So what to do? You have a manager that doesn't understand that continuing with the two strokes, then we will stand here with zero volume of production. So he was really concerned. He took contact with the management above the divisions and expressed his concerns, and also expressed that, okay, I might be wrong, but this is my take on it, and what do you think? And the top manager must have been one of the Wallenberg guys, said that yes, you're right, but what to do if the manager in Trollhättan doesn't approve? For some reason they decided to bypass him, which is very risky indeed. And everything ended up being some kind of an engineering coup in a way. So they made direct contacts with Ford, because they had done tests in the short nose proving that the Ford engine was the most suitable one if they just could get a little bit more room for it, which they then got, because the extension was probably not motivated by the by the coming coup. And here we see the engine of the coup, the Ford Cologne V4 engine. 4-stroke pushrod design, nothing really advanced in a way, but it's compact. And even though it's a bit more mass, it fitted its purpose for sure. But as you can see, when one remembers the two-stroke, it is also quite a bit higher. Here, I don't know the model year really, but the first V4s had no external finning, or whatever you should call it, on the, or reinforcement on the gearbox. Even this was not good enough for rallying and racing, so they had to make cast iron gearboxing houses for those powertrains. Anyhow, I have one of these in my car back home, so it still runs. Yeah, fairly good for its time. A lot of activity started suddenly in 1966, probably in the winter 65-66. And a whole team was set aside in a complete secret environment, not within the plant area, developing everything that you have to develop when you make a new when you make a new power plant in an engine, or no, not a new power plant, a new powertrain, I should say. It was hell of a task. And anyhow, they kind of got it made, and everything seemed to work. But how to launch it? They had to re-engineer the electrical wire harness in the engine bay. They knew that they did not have to call off that many harnesses, so they tried to call the manufacturer of the harnesses, saying that, well, you should take the volumes down. And then, of course, logistical people in the plant had the opposite opinion. And, you can just imagine what a mess. During the summer break in '66, when they were preparing for the model year '67, they gathered people and they started to rebuild cars that already had the two-stroke engines in them. They also prepared everything for the introduction of the V4 engine from Ford. So it was really something. But the sales results of the model year '67 went up quite a bit. So it was a success for sure. The engine as such had some flaws. It wasn't this kind of open deck design, so they started to get leaking head gaskets again, and anyhow, in general terms, yes, it was a success. Okay, warranty spendings started to increase a bit, but it worked. And then, and I think this is probably why Gunnar Ljungström wasn't all that involved in the swap of the powertrain, because he was involved in designing a completely new car. There were lots of, let's say, design work being done for something that would have to maybe not replace the '96, but be a supplement or a larger brother in the range of Saab cars. So what we see here is a mule car, I would say. I would define it as a mule car. It has this kind of odd Saab engine that was designed not really by Saab, because Saab didn't know how to design V4 or four-stroke engines. So there was a design assignment made to Ricardo in the UK. They had another client or customer for an engine like this, which was Triumph. So there was a joint development made, and this inline 4 slant engine, as I think it's called sometimes, Saab was the first one to use this. It has a bit of a funny inclination, partly to be a low design, but partly also because there is this Triumph Stag car that has a V8 version of this engine. Now, this car this car looks a bit funny. It has been cut in 2 halves and widened. So the windscreen, well, you can see it, of course, because there's this split, or they have tried to join 2 windscreens. But they have also joined the body, and if you look carefully, you can see that there are some reflection issues in the body. But well. So this is this is a mule car then for the '99. So here we have an early Saab '99. It has this Triumph, or let's say Ricardo developed powertrain, gearbox made in the Gothenburg plant as far as I know, and just about everything is new on this car. Must have been a huge investment for Saab, since they were so small. So every body stamping, every little detail, everything is new. Maybe you can find some little thing here and there, but in general it's a completely new car. And what a car! It's so different from the Saab '96. Well, completely different styling. Sixten Sarsson designed this one also, together with Gunnar Ljungström. And one thing that puzzles me a bit is that why did it become this unaerodynamic? They had so much focus on aerodynamic on the development of the Saab 92 especially. Why did this car come out as it did? Because the aerodynamics of this one is kind of crappy. Maybe they thought they had enough power to propel it, but I know that Gunnar Ljungström, he was really into energy efficiency and things like that, so I never heard or seen anything much about this car being taken into a wind tunnel or something. Must have taken it in there, but anyhow. I mean, having a extremely curved windshield like this, that's not really everything about aerodynamics, and they must have known more or known better in a way. Anyhow, it became quite a popular car in its days. It was way bigger. Now today it would still be considered a small car, but for its time, and being in Europe, Northern Europe, it was considered to be quite a big car. You could easily fit 3 persons in the rear seat, and so on. The visibility when driving this kind of a car is amazing. It's absolutely fabulous. So this was kind of a huge development then for Saab, and it made the foundation for decades to come. If you just look at the doors, for instance, I hope you can see the door. I mean, the door looks the same as a Saab 900 from 1993. This door was designed in the or engineered in the middle of the 1960s. The car as such, yeah, okay, it has a gear lever on the floor. The ignition was also moved to the floor because they wanted to keep the locking feature, or they maybe wanted to improve safety. Maybe they thought that you could hit your knee into the ignition lock or something like that. So here we have the Ricardo engine that was used by both Saab and Triumph. As you can see, it's a bit of a special concept. I would say a rather weird concept. Now the driving direction is that way. So here you got the clutch, you got the gear primary transmission. Later on it was changed to chains. So you got the drive shafts going that way. Overhead cam chain. Fairly good design in a way, but as in many cases, the head gaskets, they didn't last. But I know a guy, he has a Saab 99 with this engine in it, and he has driven 1 million kilometers. Yes, 1 million kilometers. How many engines have he used? Or has he used? Well, 4. But the engine that has been the most reliable one did 480,000 kilometers. So it's a bit of a hit and miss in terms of quality, but well, it's not completely hopeless. In the 1970s, there was a redesign of this, and we'll come to that in the 1970s chapter. So let's go and search for the Sonett. Here we have the Saab Sonett, or the Saab 97, the sports car that was made in the end of the 1960s. Or let's say like this, in the middle of the 60s, there was a bit of a design competition between 2 designers, Sixten Sassen, of course, and another guy that I can't really recall the name of him. The car that was perceived as the best looking car was something that looked almost like this car. Yeah, and the engineering of this car was made so that the platform, as you could call it, is a Saab 96 and a Saab 96 two-stroke even. This is kind of the engine that the Sonett also has, at least the first versions. And this specific engine that we see here is from the model year 1966 because it has triple carburetors, and this one was not highly appreciated. And why? Well, cutting cost. That can be a bit tricky sometimes. So the engineers, wanting to get a bit more power from the little two-stroke engine, had developed this 3-carburetor setup. But then they also had to develop a very special air filtering system that was tuned to the pulses that you get through the intake. That air filter design someone thought was just too expensive, so they had to do a redesign, trying to make something as good, but I think they must have been running out of time or something, and they ended up with this design. The engine is not as powerful as it should be, and it takes a lot of fuel because the pulses are going in the wrong way, and it draws kind of fuel twice the time in a way. I can't explain, but it was not a good design. Anyhow, with another air filter, this is kind of what you have in the Sonett. It is fairly long-nosed, of course, because here you have the engine and then you want some nice shape to it. The interior is, of course, completely new, and of course the body. The body is made of glass fiber plastic, quite common for low-volume cars, especially in those days. Just imagine a Corvette or something. So everything underneath and all the mechanical things comes from the Saab 96, but the Saab 97 is this sporty, good-looking model. Now, as it was produced in very small volume in 1966. It was also hit, let's say like that, it was also hit by the change in powertrain. So as the coup as the coup went along up in Trollhättan, this car was never made in Trollhättan. It was made further south in a small plant down in southern area of Sweden. So of course they had to adapt. There was not much to choose from. So they had to make a complete new molding of or for the bonnet, which then they just made a little convex bulb or something over the highest part of the engine, and then just had to adapt the car as such. So a car like this that is a two-stroke, they are quite rare. I would say very rare. It's like, I don't know, 250 cars. I don't know, something like that, somewhere between 200 and 300 cars. So very rare car indeed. The concept of the design was kept like this during the 1960s. There were small modifications. Okay, the bonnet, I think they added some air outlet also here and so on. But this was the way the Sonett looked like during the whole 1960s. Then there was a new body mainly coming in 1970. But then we'll get into the 1970s, and I think we should end this little chapter in the Saab Museum by saying goodbye to the 1960s. There will be another chapter coming around the 1970s. Bye for now. Take care.